It began in 1980, an unassuming year for most. But in a modest home in Volusia County, Florida, an eerie silence had settled where life had once stirred. Dean and Tina Clouse, a young couple in love, were gone. Their families hadn't heard from them in weeks. No letters, no phone calls, no whispers of where they might have fled. Then the first crack in the silence. 2 badly decomposed bodies found in a wooded area off a rural road. A man and a woman. The man was beaten, the woman strangled. No IDs, no names, just the brutal finality of death. And one colossal question that refused to fade. Where was their baby? Her name was Holly Marie, just a few months old, and she was gone, completely gone. Authorities didn't know who the couple was, and no one knew a child was even missing. In 1980, without DNA, without social media, without public records at your fingertips, it was all too easy for a case to vanish into paperwork and dust. The Clouse family, back in Texas, had waited, worried, pleaded. They sent letters, left voicemails, hoped for postcards, for months, for years. But time kept ticking, cold and cruel. Dean and Tina had simply disappeared into the void. No bodies, no baby, nothing. Until decades later, when science finally caught up with the past. In 2021, nearly 41 years after the murders, a miracle began to unfold. A group of genealogists, experts at tracing bloodlines through slivers of DNA, reopened the unidentified bodies case. The remains buried under Jane and John Doe markers were exhumed and tested. The results hit like a bolt of lightning. The 2 corpses were Dean and Tina Clouse. But that wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because if the Clouses were dead, where was their child? How does a baby vanish for over 4 decades and never surface? The search ignited like wildfire. Every database was combed, every genetic thread pulled. The mystery of baby Holly became a national obsession. Had she been killed too? Kidnapped? Given away? Or, somehow, was she still alive? The answer was something no one could have written, not even in fiction. In June 2022, the Texas Attorney General's office made a jaw-dropping announcement. Baby Holly was alive, not a child, not even a young woman, but a 42-year-old mother of 5, living under a new name in Oklahoma. And she had no idea her entire life had been built on the ashes of a tragedy. She was found living in a deeply religious nomadic group, one that didn't use modern identification, rarely interacted with government systems, and traveled quietly across state lines. She had been raised without knowledge of her birth name, unaware of the blood-soaked mystery that once surrounded her infancy. And then, the reunion. For the first time in over 40 years, Dean and Tina's surviving family saw her face, heard her voice, hugged the child they thought had died with her parents. But who had taken her, and why? And what happened in those missing days between the murder and the handoff? They came in silence. 2 women, barefoot, dressed in long white robes. They knocked on the Clouse family's front door in Florida sometime in late 1980, carrying a baby in their arms and a Bible in their hands. They told Dean's mother, Donna Casasanta, that her son had joined a religious group, that he no longer wanted contact with his family, that he and his wife Tina had given their baby up for adoption to their religious brethren. It was a bizarre, unsettling story, but it came with the one thing that shattered every other thought: proof of life. They were holding baby Holly. The women offered no address, no last names, no phone numbers. They spoke in soft, almost rehearsed tones. Then they turned and walked away, disappearing into the humid air of Florida like smoke from a burning page. That was the last time the Clouse family ever laid eyes on Holly Marie. They hadn't been hallucinating. They hadn't made it up. For decades, it remained the strangest, most painful piece of the puzzle. No one knew who the women were or where they had taken her until 2022. When Holly was finally found alive, the story she shared cracked open a decades-old vault of secrets. She'd grown up in what can only be described as a fringe religious sect, not formally recognized but known by law enforcement. This group didn't register births, they didn't carry IDs, they rejected modern technology and shunned the outside world. The group had moved from state to state, settling briefly in places like Arizona, California, and eventually Oklahoma. There were no schools, no hospitals. Children were raised communally and taught obedience above all else. It was as if Holly had been hidden in plain sight, beneath long robes, behind quiet fences, outside the system. Authorities began tracing records, old files, arrest logs. One report revealed that women, matching the exact description of the white-robed visitors, had been spotted in various parts of the country during the early 80s. One was arrested in Arizona in 1980, refusing to give her name and demanding to be called Sister Susan. But no one had ever connected those dots until DNA cracked the code. Even more chilling, it's still unclear whether this group murdered Dean and Tina or simply accepted Holly after their deaths. Were they involved in the killings or just opportunistic caretakers? Holly herself had grown up believing the people raising her were her real family. When she was shown a photo of Dean and Tina Clouse, the young, vibrant couple whose lives had been stolen, she broke down in tears. She had never seen their faces before. She never knew they had fought to keep her. What's worse, no one yet knows why the Clouses were targeted. They weren't wealthy, they weren't political. Some believe Dean may have tried to leave the group or confronted them. Others wonder if they were lured into a trap, offered help, then taken out to prevent interference. One thing is clear: someone wanted the baby, and someone was willing to kill to get her. For 40 years, Holly Marie Clouse was a name sealed in silence. No one knew where she was, no record, no school enrollment, no medical file, no trace in any government system. She was a ghost in the grid. But in 2021, a quiet revolution in law enforcement was changing everything. Forensic genetic genealogy, not just identifying unknown killers, but rediscovering the missing long after the world stopped looking. It was the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit that reopened the Clouse investigation, fueled by a single haunting question. If we could identify the victims, could we find the child they left behind? The remains of Dean and Tina Clouse had been discovered in a remote Texas field in 1981. But back then, there was no way to confirm their identities. Their bodies were labeled as John and Jane Doe, just more nameless victims in a decade littered with cold cases. That changed when new DNA analysis confirmed who they really were in 2021. Dean and Tina Clouse, newlyweds, vanished in 1980, murdered and left under the sun. Once their names were known, the obvious next question was asked: where was baby Holly? This wasn't about finding a suspect. This was about finding a daughter, a life that might have continued in the shadows. The team contacted Lisa Jo Sheila, a forensic genealogist trained in reconstructing bloodlines from minute genetic traces. Using DNA from extended relatives, cousins, nieces, siblings, she built a digital family tree from scratch. Dozens of matches came back, but none close enough to be a child of Dean and Tina, until something lit up the system. A woman in Oklahoma had recently uploaded her DNA to a public ancestry database, hoping to learn about her birth family. She didn't know who her biological parents were. She only knew that she'd been told, for as long as she could remember, that she was a gift to her religious family. She had no birth certificate, no adoption papers, no origin. When her results processed, they didn't match any known parents. But they did match cousins, a lot of them, from Texas. The match was unmistakable. The woman's name, Holly Marie Clouse, alive, 42 years old, married, a mother of 5, and she had no idea she was a missing person in one of Texas's most baffling murder mysteries. Authorities didn't rush the reveal. They spent weeks verifying the match, cross-referencing relatives, contacting Holly with care, preparing for the possibility that everything she thought she knew about herself was about to collapse. In a private room in Oklahoma in 2022, investigators finally told Holly the truth. Your name was Holly Marie Clouse. You were kidnapped in 1980. Your parents were murdered, and the family you never knew has been searching for you for 4 decades. She sat still, pale. The room was silent. Then the tears came. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was grief and relief and confusion, all tangled in one uncontrollable wave. She wasn't angry at those who raised her, at least not yet. She needed time to feel that. But she knew, in her heart, that a piece of her had just been returned. A part of her she never knew was missing. When the news of Holly's identity was confirmed, the ripple effect was instant. Phone calls, tears, silence, and then more tears. Back in Florida and Texas, the Clouse and Lynn families, Dean and Tina's siblings, cousins, and even elderly parents had waited 42 long years for closure. And now, they had it. Or at least, a piece of it. But this wasn't just the end of a mystery. It was the beginning of a reunion no one had dared dream of. Investigators facilitated the first contact with the family in June 2022, shortly after DNA results confirmed the match. Holly agreed to a private video call with her biological grandmother and aunts, women who had clung to photos of a baby in diapers, wondering if she'd survived. They weren't even sure she had ever made it out of Texas alive. And now, she was staring back at them on a screen, grown, smiling, alive. There were no scripted words, just raw emotion, shaking voices. One aunt cried out, "We thought we lost you forever." Holly broke down too. "I always felt something was off, like I was part of a puzzle with a missing corner." She had lived her whole life without knowing she had a name that was once whispered in every family prayer. The reunion happened in person days later, behind closed doors at a Texas law enforcement facility. No cameras, no media circus, just family, real hugs, real heartbreak, real healing. They showed her old family photos, her parents' wedding picture, Dean's goofy smile, Tina's soft eyes. Holly sat in silence, studying their faces as if trying to memorize what she should have grown up seeing. "They look like good people," she whispered. But the joy was cut by something colder, the truth about the cult. Holly had been raised by a nomadic religious group, one that rejected modern identity, birth certificates, and conventional family structure. She remembered being told she was chosen, that her biological parents had been sinners who left her behind. She now knew that was a lie. What she didn't know, and what investigators still can't fully explain, is who brought her to that group, or why. The women who dropped Holly off at an Arizona church in the early 1980s wore white robes, refused to give names, and called themselves members of the Jesus People. They were never seen again. The cult, as some investigators have called it, has long since disbanded or dissolved into new identities. They moved frequently, avoided authorities, left little behind, and most hauntingly, never resurfaced with another child. So why did they take Holly? Why spare her, but murder her parents? Was it an act of twisted mercy or something darker? Authorities are still investigating that part, but what they have confirmed is that Holly was likely handed off shortly after Dean and Tina were killed, possibly by the very people involved in their murders. The scene of the crime in rural Houston was re-examined. No new DNA, no fingerprints. The trail was still cold, but the heart of the story had shifted. For the Clouse family, this wasn't just about catching a killer anymore. It was about finally having Holly, about watching her children, their grandchildren, play, laugh, live, about seeing Dean and Tina live on in her smile. In the end, baby Holly's case isn't just a miracle, it's a warning, a reminder that some disappearances are so quiet, so strange, so buried under time, that the only thing louder than the silence is the shock of being found. And for Holly, the life she lived may never make complete sense, but she's no longer missing. She's no longer alone. She's home. If this story moved you, share it. Holly Marie Clouse was missing for 42 years. Her parents were murdered. She was raised in a world of silence, never knowing who she really was. But she was found. Some families never get that closure. Some stories never get told. Leave a comment below. What would you say to someone who's still searching for a loved one? Subscribe for more real-life mysteries, reunions, and stories that remind us truth has no expiration date. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what we uncover next. And remember, one share, one voice, one tip can change everything.